So, I was in the theatre the other week when I saw a poster for the new Ghostbusters remake, and right away I cringed. Oh god, I thought, what the hell, they're remaking Ghostbusters now? Whose terrible idea was this? Is nothing sacred? Don't they know that remaking classic movies is always a recipe for disaster? But then I stopped because I realised that some of my favourite movies are remakes. The Thing, The Fly, True Grit, Scarface, The Thin Red Line, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. These are all remakes, and they're all great. Some even better than the originals. This got me thinking, why do people have such negative reactions to the very idea of some movies being remade, but not others? Why is it that I'm pissed off at the idea of a Ghostbusters remake, but I was entirely okay with seeing another version of Cape Fear? I actually wouldn't mind seeing another remake of The Blob or The Invisible Man, but I'd just about start a riot in the streets if they ever tried to remake Back to the Future or Alien. And the same thing goes for sequels. Why is it sometimes we get so excited when you hear a sequel is being made, but other times you just groan? I mean, I'd just about shit my pants with joy if they announced a Hellboy 3 or Dread 2, and I'm pumped that Hawkins is going to make another Predator sequel. Yet I roll my eyes at the idea of another bloody Pinhead movie, or another bloody Saw movie. And it's not just movies that have bad, played out sequels. I don't think that Fight Club, or Inception, or The Babadook should ever have sequels, and those were great movies. So why this double standard? Is it just hypocrisy? Is the way that we dismiss certain sequels and remakes while selectively praising others just entirely arbitrary? See, I don't think so. I think there's a very simple reason why people react so negatively to some remakes and sequels but not others. And I think it's to do with the fact that movies, at the end of the day, are stories. And a sequel or a remake only feels welcome when the original story doesn't feel like it's been told to its full potential yet. See, when it comes to sequels, you want the story to feel like it logically continues from where the last film left off. You want the sequel to in some way complete the lead character's journey in a way that the first film may not have. And you want the story to pick up on plot threads that weren't already all tied up. In contrast, a sequel doesn't feel like it's relevant when at the end of the first movie, it feels like we've already seen everything this story has to offer. And so the sequel is only going to be dragging out a story that logically should have already finished. A great example of this is the movie Aliens. Even if the original Alien didn't ever have a sequel, it still would have told a complete story, with Ripley surviving her attack and emerging victorious, going off into cryosleep for the long trip back to Earth. It didn't end on a cliffhanger or with any kind of intentional sequel setup, it was a complete, self-contained story. But when they were creating the sequel, they realised that there were still elements in the original story left to explore. Like, what happened to Ripley when she got back to Earth? What happened to the hundreds of eggs still in the derelict ship? And where did those eggs come from anyway? So the sequel picked up on these plot threads and ran with them. We see what happened to Ripley when she got back to Earth, with her confrontation with the company. And we see what happened to the rest of the eggs. They made more aliens, which only makes sense. And we see what made the eggs. The Queen. So all these hanging over questions from the first film have been answered. And the film continues Ripley's character arc in a natural way. If the first Alien was about Ripley being confronted by her fear, then the second one was about her overcoming it, in a sense bringing to a close her character arc which began in the first film. There's a sense of causality between the two movies, where you think of course the events of the first movie led to this one. It seems so natural, logical. In comparison, look at Alien Resurrection. At the end of the previous Alien film, Ripley had come to terms with her fate and accepted her death. And all the aliens were dead. There were none left. All the company's plans had been foiled. It was all over. The end. There was nowhere else for this plot to go. And so when they tried to shoehorn in another installment, it felt contrived. Because the story was already over, but they forced in a continuation where it wasn't welcome. And I think that's why people get so annoyed with some movies having sequels but not others. We only like the idea of a sequel if it feels like the original story hasn't been finished yet, because otherwise it just feels like they're beating a dead horse. And in a slightly different sense, the same thing goes for remakes. A remake feels valid when the original story feels like it could be retold in a way that either improves upon the original, or at least reinterprets it in order to tell an aspect of the story that wasn't fully explored the first time around. And for some movies this really works. For the remake of The Thing from Another World, John Carpenter made a movie that was a more faithful adaptation of the original noveler Who Goes There. For the remake of The Fly, David Cronenberg made a movie that focused more on the body horror of the transformation between man and fly, something that the original movie glossed over. Changing 7 samurai into 7 cowboys for The Magnificent Seven allowed them to use the same premise in a whole new genre. Even the 2005 King Kong remake, while nowhere near as good as the 1933 original, found a nice new spin on the material where they explored the relationship between Kong and Anne. So these remakes feel more valid because they found aspects of the original stories that hadn't been covered yet and expanded upon them, instead of just telling the exact same story all over again. See, the big problem with remakes is that if it's too close to the original, like say the shot-for-shot Psycho remake, then there's no point in it because you may as well just watch the original. But if it's too different on the other hand, then it just becomes a remake in name only. You may as well have just changed the title and made an entirely new movie. Remakes have to hit that right balance where they change just enough to reinterpret, but keep enough the same to still be recognisable. But then there are some movies that there doesn't seem to be any reason in retelling the story in a different way because the original movies are so closely tied to the people who made them, or the time period they were made, or the process of how they were made, that to make it again without any of those elements would be pointless. Remaking a Bruce Lee movie without Bruce Lee would be stupid because the only reason people watch Bruce Lee movies is because Bruce Lee is in them. Taxi Driver was a movie that was so much about what life was like in New York in the 1970s that I can't imagine what you'd gain from making it again now. Clash of the Titans was captivating specifically because of Ray Harryhausen's stop motion effects. Making it again with CGI missed the point entirely. And then, in all honesty, some movies just seem to have been done perfectly well the first time around, so remaking them just seems redundant. Why the hell would you ever remake 2001: A Space Odyssey? Do you think you can do it better than Stanley Kubrick? Good luck with that. Or remake a movie like Apocalypse Now. That movie was such a miracle of madness that to try to recreate it would be a fool's gamble. Or even a movie like Memento, which is such a well-structured puzzle that to try to change any of the pieces in a remake I think would only serve to weaken it. Hang on, they're actually remaking Memento now? Oh, come on. Now, that all said, you tend to hear a lot of hyperbole on the internet these days where people try to claim that a bad sequel or a bad remake somehow ruins the original, or even in some way ruined their childhood. And that's just ridiculous. The fact of the matter is that nobody's taken the originals away. But that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that some movies must not ever have remakes or sequels. What I'm saying is that some movies probably should not ever have sequels or remakes. Because you're only going to be drawing unfair comparisons between it and the original, which undoubtedly already told the story better.